أهلا إن اسمي دون. And I'm here with
Sarah.
I'll be answering your questions on IELTS reading. Okay. So when do we know it starts?
I'll tell you.
You'll tell us, okay.
Yeah. Last time it kind of just began. Yeah. So at 12, so it's 12:30 now.
So is your head too small?
Oh, no, something. My head.
Okay, you're on, guys.
That's good.
Okay. Welcome to our Facebook live stream today. We're talking to you from Melbourne in Australia, and my name is Don, and here is Sarah who's helping me today. I'll be answering your questions on IELTS reading. So please write your questions in the comments below, and we'll choose a few of those to answer. Until we do that, though, we're going to have a little chat, and I'm going to learn a little bit of Arabic.
Great. Hi, Don.
Hi, Sarah. Ahlan.
So, أهلا وسهلا.
What does that mean?
أهلا وسهلا. Hi.
Oh, just hi. Okay. Ahlan.
Welcome.
كيف حالك?
بخير. It means I'm fine.
Good.
Yeah.
Me too. How do I say that in Arabic?
أنا كذلك.
أنا كذلك.
وأنا كذلك.
That's
Me
too
too.
hard for me.
Yeah.
So, Sarah,
Yes.
ماذا تعمل?
أنا أعمل محامية. I'm a lawyer.
Okay. So I just asked Sarah what she did, and she's a lawyer.
Yeah. And ماذا أنت تعمل?
أنا مدرس.
أنت مدرس. You're a teacher.
That's right.
Great.
Azim.
Azim.
That's a good
Okay.
language, Arabic.
It is.
It's quite difficult, though.
Maybe.
Difficult for me.
Difficult for you, easy for me.
Yeah. I'm too old to learn it. That's my problem.
Okay. All right. So, Don, tell us a bit about your experience as an IELTS expert.
Well, Sarah, that's an interesting question. I've been involved with IELTS for about 26 years, maybe more.
Wow.
So I was involved, I got started with IELTS around about early 90s, 91, and I've been involved in many different parts of IELTS. Now I'm working for IDP, and IDP is one of the owners of the IELTS test. So I'm involved with IELTS more than ever.
Wow, that's amazing. Well done, Don. Okay, now let's begin talking about IELTS reading. I'll ask you a few questions to start us off, and remember to write your questions in the comments for Don. First question for you, Don, today. How does IELTS test my English reading?
Well, the secret with IELTS reading is that you are asked to read a lot of words, about 2,500 words, in a relatively short time, in 1 hour. And you have to answer 40 questions. So the secret really is, how do I read quickly? If you're a slow reader, you'll understand, but you won't be able to answer all of those questions in 1 hour. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, about how to read more quickly and to be able to use your time more efficiently.
Great, thank you, Don. How is the reading test structured?
Well, there are 2 reading tests in IELTS. There's the academic reading test and the general training reading test. The academic has 3 passages, and each of those passages is about 800 words, maybe more, maybe less. And those passages are very similar to a page from a serious sort of news magazine, or a magazine like New Scientist, where you're talking about some popular science or something like that. In the general training, however, the passages are much shorter. So you might have 6 shorter passages, and those passages are about everyday things, maybe things to do with your work, a list of rules, a list of instructions, things like that.
That's great. Thank you, Don. So the next question, what is the most difficult part of the test?
Well, in the academic and in the general training, the third text is usually a little bit more difficult because in the general training it is a very similar text to the academic. But really it depends on what your experience is, what your vocabulary is like, what you're used to. So some people might find the first passage more difficult than the last passage because the topic is a little bit different. They might be more familiar with a particular topic.
Great, thank you, Don. Okay, now could you please give me some tips on how to prepare for IELTS reading to get the test score possible?
Okay, to get the best score possible. Well, remember I said earlier on that the challenge is to read as quickly as you can with understanding. So you need to practice that skill.
Mm-hmm.
So my first tip would be read a lot, but also read in different ways. Sometimes read very carefully and slowly to understand every single thing, but other times try and read quickly. Try and skim a passage so that you get a general understanding of this passage in 1 or 2 minutes, because that's a skill you'll need. The other skill you need is to scan for information. In other words, look at a text and try and work out, well, when did this happen? Or who said that? This is scanning. So if you do those things, then that will definitely improve your reading. But as well as that, you need to do a couple of other things. The thing that will really make you speed up in your reading is that you can understand more words. So that means you need to develop your vocabulary in a systematic way. So the more words you know, the better you'll be able to read.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so please remember to write your questions in the comments below for Don. I have a question from Julian. Hi, Don. What might be the best way to ensure the correct spelling and grammar in the reading response?
Okay, Julian, that's a very good question, because if you don't spell your answer correctly, or if the grammar is wrong, then that answer will be marked wrong. So spelling is pretty important. Of course, not every answer in a reading test requires you to write a word, but some do. Maybe when you fill a gap in a sentence or label a diagram. But remember that in the reading test, you won't be asked to write a word that does not already appear in the passage. So that means there is no excuse for bad spelling. The word you need is in the passage. All you need to do is copy that word into the correct space. That's spelling. Grammar, of course, is an important thing as well, because you might be asked to write a word in a sentence in your answer, and that word will have to agree with the verb. So you can't say dogs is, right? You've got to use the correct number. Is it plural or is it singular? Is it in the past or is it in the present? So those are important things. So you need to look at the question very carefully and make sure that you look at the passage very carefully and spell those words correctly.
ممتاز.
Azim.
رائع.
Yes, Sarah.
Okay, a question from Mohammed. What kind of topics are in the reading test?
Well, there are many different topics in the reading test, and they are the sorts of topics that you would find, as I said, in news magazines, in newspapers, things of general interest. Things about popular science, things about the environment, about urban planning. It could be a medical issue. It could be about any number of things. The sorts of topics, though, will not require you to have specialist knowledge. You won't need to be a mathematician to understand a passage that's a little bit about maths. You won't need to be a scientist to understand a passage that is talking about a scientific development. That means that any educated person will be able to handle any topic in an IELTS reading test. But again, remember what I said about developing your vocabulary? The more words you know, then the more easily you will understand what you read.
Great, thank you, Don. We have Imtiaz here,
Yeah.
who's saying jargon of a passage is hard to understand as we may not be familiar with the subject of the topic. What to do in this context?
Well, as I said, the topic will never be so obscure or so specialised that an educated person cannot understand it. Of course, as I said, it will help if you have some extended vocabulary. But very often, when IELTS writes these reading passages, if there is a difficult word, you will find that word explained within the passage, paraphrased, or at the bottom of the passage in a glossary. That means there will be an asterisk next to the word, a little star, and at the bottom there will be that star again with a brief definition of that word. So please look for that. But if you don't find that, and if the word is not explained within the passage, then forget about it. It's not an important word. And relax. Remember when I was saying that you should practice reading quickly? Well, do that, but also practice reading without a dictionary, because that is another skill you need in the reading test. Practice guessing the meaning of a word from the context. Practice relaxing with not knowing the exact meaning of a word. These are skills that will help you in your reading test.
Thank you, Don.
My pleasure. How do I say that in Arabic?
بكل سرور.
Oh,
Hard.
it's too hard for later on practice.
We have Afnan here, who's asking any difference between IELTS English rules and Bangladesh English rules?
Between IELTS
English rules and
Bangladesh English rules. Well, English is English all over the world. But I know that there are some regional differences. There is a thing called accepted standard English, and there are things which are not standard English. And in some countries where a lot of English is spoken, I'm thinking about India and Bangladesh, a lot of that English is not standard. In Australia, because it was founded by England and because a lot of people speak English too, that is standard English, even though it might be a little bit different to the English that you find in the United States or in Canada or in New Zealand or in Ireland or in Wales or Scotland, for example. All of that is standard English. It's accepted. But in other countries like India and Bangladesh, then you've got to be careful that what you think is standard English is in fact standard English. You can always check that. You can always go to the internet and Google any of your questions. I've got an example. In the subcontinent, in India and places like that, people often use the present continuous tense. I remember, Sarah, when I was in Oman in the Gulf, asking an Indian guy for directions, and he said, go down the road, you are coming to an intersection, you are not stopping there, you are turning at the next intersection. Now this is not really standard English, using the present continuous tense too much. So be careful of that.
Oh, interesting. Thank you so much. I have a question here from Raz.
Yeah.
Does accent matter in a speaking test?
Well, it depends. Everyone has an accent. I have an accent. My accent is Australian. Sarah has an accent. Her accent is a little bit Middle Eastern.
Arabic people.
It's slightly Arabic tone to it, right? But I understand everything that Sarah is saying, so her accent doesn't affect her score in IELTS at all. If your accent begins to affect the understanding, if people do not understand the words, then that is a problem. So be very careful. An accent is okay, but make sure it doesn't affect the way that people can understand you.
Great.
Azim.
Thank you, Mumtaz. We have a question here from Auning. Please give us some reading tricks.
Some reading tricks. Well, reading, in the reading test, there are several different types of questions. And sometimes the tricks might be involved with the type of question you have. For example, a true, false, and not given question. Very often, the not given is a problem for people. Now, if you're reading, trying to find an answer, and you can't find an answer to that sort of question, probably the answer is not given. So, another type of question is matching a heading to a paragraph. This is a very popular type of question in an IELTS reading test. If you see a lot of that word in a particular paragraph that matches the heading, well, that's probably the correct heading for that paragraph. There are some tricks like that, but the main idea is that IELTS does not require tricks. IELTS is a very real test of your real level of English. So the best trick to master is to improve your English. And that really means to read a lot, to improve your vocabulary, and practice those things I suggested, reading quickly with understanding. Sarah.
Thank you, Don. Yasin, difference between academic reading and general reading.
Between academic and general. Well, I mentioned before that the main difference is that academic reading has 3 longish passages, each passage about 800 words, a total of 2,500 words. These passages are like what you would find in a serious news magazine or newspaper. The general training has shorter passages, 6, maybe 7 passages, shorter groups of text. Perhaps they are rules, a list of instructions, or something like that, maybe an advertisement. So that's the main difference. But the similarities are that the question types are the same. So true, false, not given, filling the gap, matching a heading to a paragraph. The question types are the same. The number of questions is the same, 40 questions, and the time that you have to do those tests is the same. So there are differences and similarities.
Great, thank you, Don.
Afwan.
Afwan, what are some things online I can read for a reading beginner?
If your reading is not very strong, if you are just beginning, then I recommend you start with simple text. You can Google this, simple texts for learning English, and you'll find a lot of examples. I can't think of any exact examples off the top of my head. I can't give you any titles. But if you look on the internet, you'll find simple reading passages for beginners, and then intermediate users, and then advanced. So beginners, intermediate, and advanced readers of English.
Thank you. We have here who's asking, writing task 1 is more important or writing task 2?
Okay, so this is a question about the writing test, not the reading test, but I'm happy to answer it anyway. Excuse me. The writing is divided into 2 tasks, as you say, task 1 and task 2. Task 1 is 1/3 of the mark. Task 2 is 2/3 of the mark. Task 1 is only half as valuable as task 2, and you only get half the time to do task 1. 20 minutes for task 1, 40 minutes for task 2. So task 2 is more important. But really, you need to try and do your very best for both tasks. But really, if you have to choose, make sure that your task 2 is very good. If you get a 7 in your task 2 and only a 6.5 in your task 1, then your overall band will be a 7. If you get a 7 in your task 1 but only a 6.5 in your task 2, then your overall band will only be a 6.5. So you can see task 2 is more important than task 1.
Great, as always. We have Raz here asking,
Shukran.
Afwan. Raz asking, do you think IELTS really reflect on English skills? I have taken IELTS several times and got different scores, such as once I got 8 in listening and 6 after.
So this is Ralph, is it?
Raz.
Raz, this is a common complaint. Many people find that their scores are not always consistent. Now, you mentioned listening, and listening scores really should be consistent. It's an objectively marked test. It's a test that is designed by Cambridge so that even if the questions are harder, the overall score that you need to get a 7 is less than for a test that might have some easier questions. So that is a surprise, really, that there is such a big difference in your listening, which makes me think that maybe an attitude and the state of mind is also an important factor in your performance. Are you tired? Are you concentrating fully? Things like this are very important. Are you being careful about your spelling and your handwriting? Because handwriting is an important part of the listening, the reading, and the writing. If you are writing and it's not clear what you have written, then that will be marked wrong. So be very careful about things like that. But my advice to all test takers for any test, it doesn't matter, it could be IELTS or any other test, make sure that you have a good night's sleep the night before, make sure you have a good breakfast, and then you will be fully prepared for the test.
Thank you so much. We have Sadia here. In academic writing, do I need to follow any specific format for task 2? Let's say there is an argument of A and B and which one I support. Should I make it clear that I support A in the beginning, followed by my argument, or should I tell about both A and B and in the end wrap up my conclusion saying I support A? Cheers.
Okay, so that's a good question. How do I structure a task 2 essay? There is no one answer for this. It's typically a typical essay in English is that you make it very clear what your position is fairly early in the essay. So I would recommend that you do that you make your position clear in the first paragraph and then support what you say throughout. But there are other things that are important as well. The question itself you need to analyse, because sometimes the question is asking you to give both sides of an issue. Sometimes it does not ask you to do that. It simply says, to what extent do you agree? And you can answer a question like that quite easily. I agree completely. Sometimes the question might say, what are the problems that this issue causes for the individual and society? That means you must discuss both of those things in order to fully answer that question. So be careful that you analyse the question very closely and work out exactly how many things you have to say and then say them in the essay. If you give your opinion at the beginning, that's good. But if you did write an essay where you discussed the whole thing and then finished with your opinion, that would also be okay, because the examiner is assessing your writing based on quite clear assessment criteria. And you can find these assessment criteria if you go to the IELTS Essentials website. You'll see the assessment criteria for writing task 1 and 2. And in those criteria, you'll see that the examiner is looking for you to give a clear opinion, to state your view clearly. It doesn't say it has to be stated in the first paragraph. It doesn't say it can't be stated in the last paragraph. As long as you state it, that's the main thing. Okay?
Thank you so much, Don.
My pleasure.
We have Khalid here.
Yes.
What is your...
I love the way you say
Khalid, yeah.
That's
Khalid,
very
you
good.
can say it. You can always
Khalid.
say Khalid. Oh, Khalid.
That's good.
Khalid.
It clears my throat.
Okay, Khalid, your advice about writing test.
My advice about the writing test.
Yeah.
Well, with the writing test, I've just said one of the important things is to analyse the question. That's in task 2. Analyse the question. That's very important. In task 1, you need, of course, to analyse a graph or analyse a table of figures. Now, all of these things require practice. So I would recommend that one of the best things to prepare for writing is to read. When you read a newspaper, look at graphs or tables of figures that you find in your newspaper. Analyse those graphs. When you're reading the opinion section in a newspaper, analyse the argument and analyse the argument for and against particular issues. Read about issues. The more knowledge you have about things like environment, urban development, globalization, things like that, that will help you when you have to write a task 2 essay. And by the way, it will also help you in your speaking test, because you're probably asked to talk about those things, and it will probably help you in your reading test, because often the passages you read are about things like that. Sarah.
رائع.
Oh, what's that?
Great.
Great.
Okay. We have a question from Dia. Okay, Dia,
Yeah.
we can say Dia.
Okay.
Dia, hello there. I need IELTS for studying master in Germany. So what is your recommendation for preparing for IELTS?
Okay. So I presume the masters in Germany will be in English as the language of instruction. Well, I don't know what score you need for a master's degree in Germany, but I suspect it will be something like a 6.5 or a 7. So you're looking at those things. I mentioned earlier on the assessment criteria for writing. There are also assessment criteria for reading, for speaking. So please look at those on the IELTS Essentials website, and there you'll see what a band 7 looks like for writing and for speaking. Look at that band and work out where are your strengths, where do you fit that band, or where are your weaknesses? Is there something that is missing in your performance in that band 7 range that you have to improve? I would recommend also that you get a teacher, a tutor, and you can find a coach very easily. You can find them, you could put an ad up at a language centre. You could go to the internet and find coaches. You could find someone locally who you just meet in the supermarket who might be able to help you by reading your essays, by having some conversation with you as well. So having a coach and knowing where you have to improve is very important.
Thank you so much. We have a last question here.
Okay.
From Mohammed, some tips on reading task for general test.
Okay. Ahlan, Mohammed.
Ahlan.
I mispronounce Arabic all the time. So this was for the reading test, okay? For general training. For general training, reading, as I said before, they are short passages. And very often the sort of passage that you'll find in a general training reading test is something similar to what you would find in your letterbox. If you go to your letterbox tonight, you'll probably find something from the local supermarket. You might find a pamphlet about someone wanting to clean your house or do something like that. That's perfect general training reading. It's the sort of reading that you will find in an IELTS general training test. So look at those things, don't just throw them in the rubbish. But as I said before, as a general principle, practice reading quickly, practice improving your vocabulary, and then you'll be able to succeed in the reading test.
Great. Can we just skip the last question?
Yeah.
One. Okay.
One more.
One more. Sorry. Okay. Anjali, what strategy do you recommend for the reading paper?
What strategy do I recommend
for the reading paper?
For the reading test.
Should be prepared,
Yeah.
Academic.
For the academic reading test. Well, it's really the same strategy as I recommended for the general training. You need to improve your speed. There are 3 passages, of course, which means you have 20 minutes for each passage. So you have about 13 or 14 questions in 20 minutes. Think of it like that, then you might be able to manage your time more successfully. Managing time is the secret in the reading test. Don't stay on a difficult question for more than a couple of minutes. Leave that question behind and go through the easier questions and then come back for the later questions. If you do that, then you'll find that you might even have a little bit of time at the end to check your questions and check things like spelling, check things that make sure that you have put the right answer in the right spot. Don't put 2 answers where one is asked. Don't put 3 words if they say answer in no more than 2 words. So check all of those things as well. All right, so that's as much advice as I can give you today. My lunch is waiting. We'll be back with you in 2 weeks to answer more questions on IELTS preparation. And I would like to say shukran gazilan.
Afwan.
Sarah.
Afwan. Thanks for everyone for joining us today. And see you soon.
Okay, bye.